Hi, I'm Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work, and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome, Pippa, and thank you for joining me for this special Mother's Day episode exploring mother in the mother and maternal lineage, which I can't wait to dive into. For those that don't yet know about you and your incredible work, please could you give us an insight into who you are and the journey that's taken you to do the work that you're doing now? I mean, what made you interested in this? Kind of give my listeners a peek inside your world.
Okay. Well, I'm a socially engaged artist, which basically means that I have a creative practice that is largely working with people and communities. And my interest is in people's stories, so their personal stories and how those stories maybe connect together. And when I became a mum, I'm a mum to two girls. Um, the story that was very present for me was around maternal lineage. I am estranged from my own birth family, and I had been for quite a long time at the time of when I gave birth to my first daughter. But I didn't realize how strongly I would feel that lack and that loss during pregnancy and in the early years of having my children. And because this was such a sort of strong theme in my own life, by the time I had my second daughter, I decided to create an arts project out of it. It's often, I guess, my way of dealing with things, challenges in life, things that are difficult, to try and get creative and maybe reach out to other people and create connections. And so I did just that around this theme of maternal lineage, asking other mums what their experience was and how their experience of the way that they had been mothered affected the way that they were then mothering their own children. And obviously it was wide ranging. And yeah, it was a truly fascinating journey.
Love that you're now channeling kind of what was going on for you in your life into your creative outlet. So did you always know that you wanted to be an artist?
No, not at all, which I think is great. So when I was at school, it was the last thing that I would ever have said that I would have been. That my life journey has had several challenges along the way, and I guess I've taken a sort of creative approach to them and have worked across different creative media, but also in sort of healing, sort of natural healing, those kind of areas. And yeah, the two things have just kind of grown and developed over the years, but absolutely not what I thought I would be when I was, yeah, growing up.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So, this all started with your Mother in the Mother art project. Can you tell me a little bit more about it and how the project started?
Yeah, sure. So it began as this arts project, and I was in the very early stages of motherhood with my second daughter. So she was a few months old, and I had this kind of burning need to create a project, which may have been slightly fueled by lack of sleep and adrenaline, but I decided it was the best and, healthiest thing to do at the time. And and this was back in 2012. I got together a very small group of friends who were mums with young children together on Mother's Day, and we talked about our experiences of motherhood. And it was a really powerful, profound day where we all opened up a lot more than we would normally talk to about. Sorry, I'll say that bit again. I'm stuttering there. Um, we we all opened up a lot more that day, really talking about our true experiences of motherhood, including the dark and difficult parts of it. And it was very joyful and healing to be able to do that in a safe space. And from that point, I went on and had more groups, created more groups with different women. and managed to get some funding from the Arts Council, and over the next 3 years collected lots and lots of women's stories, and ultimately in 2015, again on Mother's Day, we had an exhibition, which included portrait photography and written stories and films that people had made and sculptures that I had made. And yeah, the whole put the whole thing together as an exhibition for the public to come and view.
I imagine that was such a profound and powerful experience to be part of. So, how many women participated in that art project?
At that point, I think we had around 2 to 300 women.
Wow, that many. I can only imagine like the richness and diversity that came out through that number of women. So then you decided to turn it into the book. Can you share about that journey? How did that come about?
Yeah, sure. The part of the exhibition, was a collection of written stories that I got printed up into a book, with people's photos. Just one of those kind of photo books, that you can do online, and it was a nice thing to have at the exhibition. But several people who saw it there thought, "Oh, this is great. Can I buy one? What can we do with this?" And at that point, I literally had about 3 copies of it. So I thought about this, and a part of me thought, "Oh, no, just let it go, this is the end of this project," but that little seed had been sown, and so I decided to not just try and publish the book as it or this collection of stories as it was, but also to go out and collect more stories to feed into it as well. And so I got another little patch of funding and went and did that and worked with I wanted to make sure that we really covered a lot of diversity, and so made sure that I reached out to lots of different groups of women, collected more stories, and then the task of putting it all together and trying to get a publisher, and got hold of, actually went to Lucy Pearce at Womancraft Publishing initially to help with some editing. And then when she read the transcript at the time, said that they would be interested in publishing it. So it was a wonderful kind of journey of yeah, finding a publisher that way.
So, when did this core theme of the mother in the mother emerge rather than kind of the broader motherhood theme? Was it at the beginning or was it kind of through the journey?
The theme Mother in the Mother came when I gave birth to my first daughter, so actually a few years before the project began. And it was the moment I gave birth to her, I had this really strong sensation that she would give birth one day and that there'd be this sort of lineage of like coming forward from us. And then with that, at the same time, there was a sense of a lineage that came behind us as well. And when she was about 2, my maternal grandmother was in hospital for about a month and then she died. And there was a time in the hospital where there was my grandmother there, my mother, who I was largely estranged from at the time, myself, and my 2-year-old daughter. And it was just this incredibly profound time where I felt that there was this deep connection between the maternal lineage, despite the fact that it was a family that had a lot of fracture in it. And that just got me thinking, but also deeply feeling, I think, about this idea that we're all connected. And at some point on this journey, I learnt that the egg that becomes you exists in your mother when she's a fetus inside your grandmother. And yeah, that blew me away. And, and that really became, that's where the title Mother in the Mother came from, that there was a sort of sense that there is a point in time when the 3 bodies are actually existing all together.
Ah, likewise, when I discovered that fact, it blew my mind. So, can you share some of the themes that emerged through your book? And for people who might not be aware of maternal lineage and the other concepts you explore, would you mind giving some insights into them, please?
Yeah, sure. As I collected different stories, it was really clear that there were some very strong themes. And these ranged all the way from women who had incredibly strong bonds with their mothers and who felt that bond sort of almost more strongly when they had their own children, to women who maybe had had very difficult and challenging relationships with their mothers and everything that was then brought up for them when they had their children. And a very common theme that came up was around women wanting to break the cycle and to change what had gone before. There's something in motherhood itself, I think, that is can become almost like I'm not sure if the right word is repetitive, but you can find yourself, or I've certainly found myself opening my mouth and, saying something that my mother had said, and that absolutely not being what I wanted to do, but it's almost like an unconscious connection. Um, and women wanting to get right underneath that and to actually look at what it would take to break that sort of unconscious connection so that they could do things, I guess, more consciously and differently, and not just automatically, do things the way, carry on parenting the way that they were parented. Or sometimes women would sort of experience like the flip side, whereby they're trying to parent almost exactly the opposite of the way they were parented. But to actually kind of, do the work, the personal work to get underneath that and work out what it is, that they're carrying, what's their lineage, and to then understand how they can parent their children from a different place. So that was a really common theme, breaking the cycle. And there were other themes as well. There was this, I came up with this sort of phrase, the river of maternal love.
I love that phrase, Pippa. I loved it.
And it was just this idea that there's something almost bigger than us as human beings. There's a, if you, when you become a mum, you tap into this river of maternal love, and it kind of flows through us. And I think with that came the themes of healing through motherhood, that it can be this incredible, it has this incredible potential for healing during that time. And also a theme around other mothers, that sometimes women found that if they didn't have a strong maternal figure in their life, or maybe not a positive maternal figure, that they found those maternal figures elsewhere. So that became a theme around other mothers. And again, it's this idea that the river of maternal love will find a way. So even if it's kind of blocked in your immediate family, there'll be access to it somewhere else. And you can, if you're open, then you can open to that, and it will hopefully sort of come through into your life and help with the parenting of your children.
Yes. And you also talk about the centric woman, and I'd not come across that concept
Yes.
before. Would you mind sharing what you mean by that, please?
Yes, again, it kind of goes back to this idea of the mother in the mother. So I was thinking about these 3 bodies there all at the same time, and there's one of them who, so if you consider, I guess the people I was working with were mums, and I was considering them as the centric figure that has a mother, sort of behind them in a sense, but has also become a mother, so has a child before them, and that they are in this sort of central place where they are looking both backwards to how they were mothered and forwards to how they are mothering, and how it can be incredibly challenging to be in both of those relationships at the same time. It's not like you can, completely cut one off from the other. So you're both of those relationships are developing and changing at the same time, and they all affect each other.
Yes. You talk in the book about inhabiting the same body and person, but there's almost these two different voices, which I thought was a really interesting point.
Oh, you've
And
just
you
cut
also
out.
talk in the book about the genetic component, the mitochondria DNA, and how that's the genetic trace that's passed through history.
Yeah, I found that fascinating when I was researching that, about the sort of, people talk about mitochondrial Eve, and that you can work out, you can go back and back and back through generations, and you can trace the DNA of women. It could, because it passes through the maternal line. And yeah, that to me just added this whole sort of extra layer of to the idea of lineage and heritage and that which we carry forward and onwards.
I also loved your part on grandmothers in the book. Obviously, I'm a mum and I'm yet to be a grandmother. And I didn't have my mum or grandmother around when I became a mum. They'd both died before I had my children. So didn't actually have that experience. But I thought great insights in the book around that shift that happens when a baby is born and that kind of almost life transition for someone stepping into being a grandmother and the shift in the family dynamic.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, isn't it? It's I mean, I feel like I don't fully understand it, but it absolutely like when a whole new life comes in, everyone shifts position. I think Naomi Stadler described that very well in her book, What Mothers Do, and it just talks about how it sort of shakes everything up and that everyone has a new role, and it's about adapting to that. And yes, I'm not a grandmother myself, but I do see that that's an incredibly sort of strong and pivotal point in someone's life and in the way they relate um, to all their other relations. And potentially, I mean, my hope is that it's a time of real joy and, it'll be a wonderful thing to become a grandmother. But I also imagine it has huge amounts of challenges with it and that it's not your direct child and therefore you don't have, the same relationship. And yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to research more, to be honest, and to find out more women's experiences of that transition from being a mother to becoming a grandmother.
Yes, I think you allude to it in your book actually, that you can look through the lens of almost like, how did I mother? And then this new perspective as being a grandmother, almost slightly removed from the direct mothering, about thinking about, what does this mean about the mothering I gave? Kind of just as we become mums, we start to reflect on our own relationship with our mothers and that maternal heritage. I know I absolutely did, and it really threw me at times. So I'm interested in, how has the mother in the mother journey you've gone on impacted you personally? And how has it shaped your own mothering journey?
I think it's almost hard for me now to see my journey of motherhood, separate from the book. It had such a sort of integral part within my own maternal journey. This, like I say, the seeds for it were there from the time my first daughter was born. I started the project when my second daughter was born. My children are now 16 and 11. And so this project has been live really throughout most of their lives. And we had a very beautiful time at the book launch back in 2019 where they were both present. And it felt really wonderful for them to be there and sort of part of that public journey as well. And to see, that I'd created something that was related to myself as a mother, but it also had a public face. And I think it's massively enriched my own journey. I do think maybe at times there are layers of complication with that. But I've tried to stay as real as possible and not to feel like I've got any answers or anything like that. I definitely don't. I'm, like any other mum who's just kind of, working through the challenges day by day. And at times, I think it's really lovely, and I think the book is at one of these times for me when it feels like I was at a certain stage where I had a certain level of reflection that I could put this book out into the world. And, what I mean is like a certain level of reflection around my motherhood journey and where I was at. And now I find I'm, facing a whole new set of challenges and, I've got sort of teenagers and puberty and all these things to deal with. And it's a whole other journey. And yeah, um, I don't feel like by having, written a book about people's experiences that it's in any way qualifies me to be some kind of, mother who knows what they're doing. I feel like I'm still working it all out day by day.
And I hear that, but I also hear in your write and how you talk that there's like great respect for that, what's gone before and what might come next. mixed and that it's all connected in the thread that we don't fully understand, but we know that's there.
Yes, exactly, and actually it's yeah, it's really beautiful recording this at this point because I feel like I'm maybe on another one of those bits of a thread where I can't quite see how it all connects up at the moment, so it's lovely to, have this conversation and realise that there has been a lot of sense making, I think, for myself through, having creating this project, and yeah, I think there will be more of that to come.
My systemic training is to everyone and everything has a rightful and respectful place in a system. And what I feel like you've done with your book is just place people rightful and respectful place without judgment. You know, for some people that's positive experience, and for others it may not have been, but it doesn't from those people had a place honouring that.
Yes, thank you. That's a really lovely way to put it, really beautiful, because I think that is was my whole point was just to transparently show the stories without there being any sense of judgment or, one thing being right or one thing being wrong. It's just to honour that everyone has their experience and everyone has their place. And like you say, there's a sort of point in time as well as in space where everything does kind of fit and it does make sense, but maybe only retrospectively sometimes.
Yeah, and again, my training taught me about systemic entanglements that, that we know it or not unconsciously, we can get entangled in those systems. And part of that is just illuminating and going, yeah, before me came a mother and a grandmother, right, without judgment, that has an influence on how I'm showing up in this present. And I think you've done a beautiful job of doing that in this book.
Yeah, often it is just that sort of shining a light on things, isn't it? Opening things out, unpacking them and shining some light on it and not trying to find a right or wrong or an answer, but yeah, just to allow it to have its space and speak out.
Yeah, and I think your point about the river, how do we get flow in a system? Particularly, you talk about, your metaphor. Rivers can get blocked, or there can be a drought. Or, I thought that was stagnancy in water. That actually, how do we get flow through the system? So, from grandmother to mother to daughter to granddaughter, how do we get that flow? And resource ourselves in our mothering journey, regardless of what's gone on.
Yeah, that's such a journey, isn't it? And, yeah, so important to I think that was really important for me when I came up with that metaphor. It was like, "Oh, yeah, that really helps," because there will always be flow. It doesn't always feel like that, and, yeah, there are blocks and stagnations and, water can get polluted and all sorts of things, but ultimately, I guess I was trusting in the idea that there is something bigger than us that is flowing through and, yeah, helping at some level to guide our journeys.
Yeah, I know. I mentioned before we hit record that when I became a mum, I'd lost my mum 9 years before, and it hadn't even occurred to me that I would struggle becoming a mum without my own mum around. Now I realise how naive that was, but especially after research and understanding more about this, no wonder I struggled and didn't feel resourced because I didn't feel like I had my maternal line to lean into physically. And I really had to do the work to kind of metaphorically get flow when I couldn't actually access it at that time.
Yes, I absolutely resonate with that. I went into pregnancy and motherhood really quite naively and thinking it was all, gonna be fine, and then it really hit me, the fact that I didn't have those, like you say, that sort of family line and resources. And one of the things that I worked with people was I worked with a group of women who had lost their mothers before they had their own children, and that was fascinating to hear their different stories and, their grief, the loss, but also often a sense that something was flowing down that maternal line even without the, sort of biological presence of their mother still being there.
Yes, I can relate to that. Thank you for doing this and putting it out into the world. Kind of, what are your hopes for the legacy of this project in your book?
I think it's around this, theme that we're talking about around flowing, and it's around reaching more people and I love the fact that already, I mean, it's one of the joys of having, a great publisher is that it's sort of reached out across the world already. And, if I hear from people from other countries and things like that, that's a really beautiful experience. But I also hear back from people just, every now and then out of the blue, I'll hear from maybe someone who wrote their story and contributed it to the book many years back now, and will tell me that it's actually had this profound effect on their life, and maybe sort of update me on how things are changing in their life or in their relationships with their mother or with their children. And those little things mean so much, and that it can have had even a sort of drop of an effect on anyone's life is the most wonderful thing to hear. So I guess I just hope that it keeps spreading outwards really, and that, yeah, more people as they are becoming mothers, or dealing with challenges of motherhood are able to maybe dip into it and find some solace or some comfort or something that resonates with them. And that it I guess it was always around connection, connecting people and the power of that and how useful it is to share our stories. So the more it gets shared, the better, really.
Yes, the power of storytelling. And again, I'd underestimated the power of story and the healing story, like you say in your book. The my first birth was traumatic, and um, I hadn't realized that I needed to tell my story in a really safe place to actually process and heal from it. And I think you've really given people the gift of doing that through your book.
Yeah, it's an amazingly powerful thing, isn't it? And really sort of, something I think that as humans we innately need and also are drawn to, this idea of telling our stories. And yet often, especially when you're leading a busy life as a mum, there's very little space to do that. So finding these times to reflect and to share are really precious, I think.
So thank you for that. So if there's just one thing that you want someone listening to this episode in and around Mother's Day and about mothering the mother, what would you want them to take from this conversation?
Oh, I think I would want them to trust in themselves and in their own journey, and that even if it feels very hard, tough at times, that there is a reason, or that there is a point coming through that and starting to make some sense of it. I think the quote I love in life is, "No mud, no lotus," and I think without the mud, without the difficulties, we don't get the full beauty of the lotus flower, and sometimes it's very hard to remember that when we're deep in the challenging times. So maybe it's just a little reminder that, yeah, but by working by working in that deep mud sometimes, it really helps the beauty of the lotus flower come through.
I love that quote. It's beautiful. So I know people are going to want to find out more about you and your book. Where can you point people to, please?
Thanks. So I've got a website which is One Story, where you can find all about the different projects that I run and the sculptures that I make and things like that. And there's also a quarterly seasonal newsletter that people can sign up to if they'd like to. I'm on Instagram. I'm just not the best at social media, but I do try. And Instagram seems to be the one that works best for me. So that's a good place to find me.
And what are you under on Instagram?
On Instagram, it's at Pippa One Story, and that's Pippa, and then One Story is ONE. Yeah, thank you. And I suppose yeah, on Womancraft as well on their website too.
Is that the best place to get hold of your book?
Yes, you can buy directly through me on my website or through Womancraft. And yeah, you can. I think it's probably on sale through Amazon and various places as well. So yeah, but come to us first.
Fantastic. Well, look, Pippa, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your work with me and my audience.
Oh no, it's been a real pleasure chatting, Nikki. Thanks so much. I've really valued your wisdom and insight into the subject, and the amount of depth that you've taken from the book. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too, so if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.